Hey, gang, before we begin, we've all experienced blackouts before, right? Particularly at night, that bizarre feeling when the power grid goes out and our homes go completely dark. I'm preparing for my next blackout with a wonderful device called the LyteBug. The LyteBug is a portable, solar-powered, ultra-bright floodlight with 3 lighting modes. And because it's solar-powered, you obviously never have to worry about wires or batteries. And it comes with a power indicator so you know how much charge is left. It's perfect to light up your fishing, your hiking, or camping trips because it's so lightweight and portable. And if you click on that link below today, you're going to get 20% off your order. So what could be better? Make sure to click on that link below or head on over to LyteBug.com and get your emergency backup light today.
A sad day for many of us, including myself in talk radio with the news of the passing of Rush Limbaugh. We continue because that is our charge, and we continue in this half hour with Dr. Stephen Turley, the man who is the head of Turley Talks on YouTube. You may have seen him there, and he's appeared with us before on the Nightcap and joins us again this evening. How are you, Dr. Turley?
I'm doing well, Gary. Jeff, thank you for having me back. Yeah, it is a sad day for all of us broadcasters and independent content creators. There was just no one like Rush. He's absolutely irreplaceable.
And conservatives in general, and providing a platform for conservative talk. Before Rush Limbaugh, which came on the heels of the eradication of the fairness doctrine, which was anything but fair,
right,
as far as expressing thought on the airwaves. But before that, there really was not a voice for people who had conservative viewpoints in major media.
Yeah, Gary, Jeff, to be honest, he converted me. I was a hardcore lefty back in the late 80s, early 90s. I was at a music conservatory with the Arts and Croissant crowd, and I used to practice my classical guitar late at night around 1 or 2 a.m. And his, and I used to leave the TV on, my little black and white television with 3 channels. I would keep it on just to, keep some background noise. And all of a sudden, I remember it was 1993 at the beginning, so Clinton just started, after winning in November '92, sure. And I just started to see this TV show of this, this sort of brash, bravado kind of guy who was just beating up Clinton every night, but yet whimsically, never mean. He was always rather quite funny, and I always enjoyed politics, so I just listened to him. And Gary J, he converted me. I mean, it took a few months, but I just remember going, oh, my, this is impossible. I'm becoming conservative. No one's going to even talk to me anymore at the music conservatory. But lo and behold, here we are.
Well, that's interesting that you say that, Dr. Turley. What do you think made you so hardcore left before that? What was your background that led you to that?
Yeah, well, I grew up in Connecticut. Connecticut's rather secular. I mean, New England is very, very secular. And there tends to be this connection between secularization and liberalization. And so I think that had a big part to it. It's strange because I always loved Reagan when I was part of the Reagan youth, as it were. And I remember staying up late 1980 in November. I was 11 years old watching the election, and I was just captivated by him, and I wanted him to win, and I even supported Bush Sr. But then when I got to the music conservatory, it was the culture, it was the air that you breathe. Scholars call it habitus. It's a funny term, but habitus is this idea that you breathe in worldviews around you, and then you breathe them back out in your own brand and your own style. And everybody I was around in the music conservatory and at Johns Hopkins, they were all just far leftists. So I figured, I guess that's the normal thing. Never thought about it. I was never critical about it. That's where Rush came in. And when I first discovered his TV, but then I discovered, obviously, the radio. And I would listen to that daily, 3 hours a day, playing my guitar. And I was stunned that he was so willing to engage with liberals and leftists. He would always say, hey, if you're a liberal, call on in. We'll put you in the front of the line. And, where I came from in the music conservatory, you never debated conservatives. Well, they didn't exist, and even if you met one, they'd be knuckle draggers anyway, so you wouldn't need to talk to them. But I was so impressed with how he never backed down from an engagement. He was always respectful, witty, funny, and the points he made me think critically about my own worldview. And he did it. And I owe him everything for that.
Well, I mean, the left does not believe in allowing people to engage in critical thinking. And that's what Rush always stressed. He said, think critically about this. Think for yourself, and then try and come up with a reasonable argument for the way you believe or what you don't believe.
Right. Absolutely right. Yeah, he was self-reflective. He understood what his first principles were. He always stuck to them. And I remember, too, very vividly, especially in light of Trump. So it was a bit ex post facto. But if you think it through, he's always had this kind of Reagan populism, this Reaganite populism. He never was comfortable with the establishment. He was constantly railing against the Republicans. What are you guys doing? This is crazy, and you're forgetting who you are, and stop always apologizing for being conservative. Stop, be robust. And I think that's one of the reasons why I was so impressed with Trump, even though Trump wouldn't have been ideologically on par with Rush being so learned. I mean, I think he modeled his own Holmes library after, wasn't it the Biltmore Mansion in North Carolina? And
yeah,
the library there. I mean, Rush, I know his father was an avid reader. So, I mean, Trump isn't going to have that kind of, Hayek-based sort of conservatism, but Trump knew who the enemy was, and Trump was willing to fight. And that was something that Rush could recognize that a lot of guys like, his elite compatriots, say in National Review or the Heritage Foundation, just never quite understood about Trump.
Indeed. Steve Turley, if you don't know his work, haven't heard him before on the program, is author tell people about your book about conservatism. And you believe it's on the rise. And still, all the evidence around me in the news tells me that it's not on the rise, but then it's hard for me to watch the so-called news because it's all so much propaganda anymore. I feel like I'm reading a copy of Pravda every time I pick up a newspaper or watch the seemingly state-owned media. So talk about that for a few minutes, if you would. Dr.
Yeah, no, Gary, Jeff, that would only be the case if CNN actually had the brother of a governor or something like that who was trying to cover up COVID deaths. No, we're far, far from that. What didn't Tucker just say the other night? The media's acting like North Korean gymnast team around Kim Jong-un or something akin to that. Yeah, well, actually, in many ways, I get I think my introduction to conservatism was through Rush Limbaugh and therefore through a very Reaganite optimism. Rush never lost it. He always had it. He was, you never felt like you had to build a bunker after you listened to Rush. But he was never Pollyanna. He was very serious and very sober about the challenges in front of us. But like Reagan, he recognized that conservatism is at the heart of the human spirit. It is what it means to be human, with the very principles of faith and family and freedom and the like. So that's how I was sort of raised in my conservatism in my early 20s. And when I was doing my doctoral studies at Durham University in England, I came across a field of scholarship known as post-globalist or post-secular studies. They go by both names. And those studies actually find that how do you want to call it, modern leftist, globalist, liberal world, it really is on its last legs. It's really beginning to keel. And oftentimes when an animal is trapped and is dying, that's when it could be its most vicious. And I think that's what we're seeing today.
Oh, absolutely, Dr. Turley. We have seen them backed into a corner and doing everything they can to survive with these worldviews, and then when I say worldviews, I mean one worldviews of everything. You see them pulling out all the stops, trying to remain viable and remain relevant to people, but you say that that's not working.
It's not. I mean, again, it's we have to remember we're at the apex, we're at the vanguard of this left-wing liberalism. Even now, as we speak, Emmanuel Macron of France, the president of France, who was once the darling of the left, is now coming out and warning that American leftism cannot be permitted to be exported into France because it'll destroy France the way it's destroying the United States. You're seeing the Russian Orthodox Church exercising a power and an influence in Russian society not seen since the days of the czars. Poland and Hungary are creating what they call Christian democracies, where conservatism is flourishing, particularly in Poland and Hungary, because they do tend to be very ideologically conservative as well as populist conservative. You're seeing it in Slovenia, Melania Trump's home country. You're seeing it in Slovakia and the Czech Republic. In Austria, of course, Brexit just shrunk the EU. Anti-EU sentiments have never been stronger. India has had 2 landslide victories back-to-back with nationalist populist party called the BJP. Brazil, the largest nation in the southern hemisphere in South America, there has a fully conservative, they call him the Jair Bolsonaro, the tropical Trump. Everywhere we look, we see conservatism, traditionalism, nationalism, populism on the rise, and globalism on its heels. And we had a setback in 2020, no question. But there's a big difference between a wall and a road bump, and I think we hit a road bump rather than smacking against the wall.
Do you think it's possible that the left and the secularists can ensure the fact that no conservative ever wins a major office in this country? That's been the great concern with the control. If they eliminate filibusters and the like in the Senate, if they add 2 more states to the union, as they've talked about with Puerto Rico and Washington, D.C., of all places, where all the power's concentrated are our federal government anyway, it's unconstitutional for them to do it, but they keep talking about doing it. Is it possible that they could outlaw conservatism and the movement you're talking about?
Try, of course. They're going to do, because they are totalitarian by nature, so they only want one-party rule. Dissent is not allowed. That's the Marxist element of the left. But all we have to do is just, let's not forget recent history, December 25th, 1991, right? The most atheistic regime and totalitarian regime in human history collapsed on Christmas Day, 1991.
How about that?
We've seen far worse fall apart right before our very eyes. So I don't want to give any sense that this is going to be easy or it's not going to be really unpleasant at times. There's no question it's not going to be easy, and it's going to be very unpleasant. But the trajectory, really in the end, when all is said and done, liberalism rests in what's called modernity. And modernity is an 18th century philosophy that says that scientific rationalism is one true way of understanding all of reality. So everything that preceded scientific rationalism, all religion, all customs, cultures, traditions, all conservatism at all, any kind of philosophy, ideology that believes in certain perennial principles, certain enduring, eternal principles. All of that's bunk. All of that's nativist and bigoted and the like. That all needs to be thrown away. What scholars have noticed is that modernist scientific rationalism, that's the foundation of liberalism, is dead. It's dead in the hearts and minds of Westerners. Now, even though its roots have rotted out, the fruits of modernity continue to get exported by our elite in the form of globalization. But you don't have to be a genius to figure out that if the roots have withered and died, then it's just a matter of time before the fruits wither and die as well. So they're going to be brutal. They're going to be pretty horrible. They're going to try everything they can. But in the end, I think they're just prolonging what is inevitable.
What about these people who claim and trying to co-opt traditional spiritual and religious values, saying that Jesus was a socialist and all these other things. How it seems like in many places in America, if you look in some of these congregations, that has seeped into the pulpit and poisons
Again,
the
like
parishioners.
This isn't going to be easy. And it's the exact same thing that we saw in Eastern Europe in the Orthodox Church there in Russia. Absolutely same thing we've seen in the Catholic Church and certainly in Protestant churches, where a cultural Marxism has really invaded. We have a very hard time thinking outside of very, shall we say, critically racist frames of reference. That's the only sense. We don't know any other term than social justice, for example, when trying to pursue equity in the world, which is ironic because that's exactly what conservatism is. It's an equality of opportunity. We're all about equity, but of course they're about equality of outcome. So no question, it's going to be rough. Again, the good news is that the populist revolt that we're seeing happening all over the world between the people versus some kind of establishment, some kind of elitist political class, that's happening in the churches as well, big time. So the rank and file, the true believers in the pulpit or in the pews tend to be very alienated from what's often being presented in the pulpit. And so the good news again is that you're seeing the more liberal that the denominations become, the more they begin to implode. The United Methodist Church, for example, loses the equivalent of a 300-member parish per day.
Wow.
It is literally losing hundreds of thousands of parishioners. Now, in fairness, some of them are just dying off because it's very old. But the younger blood, they're actually, believe it or not, very attracted to very traditionalist Christianity. When Pope Benedict brought back the Latin Mass about a decade ago, they thought that the people showing up to the Latin Mass would be, octogenarians, and people say, oh, I remember before Vatican II, this is how we used to worship in the 50s and the 60s. They were shocked to find that the vast majority of people showing up were between the ages of 16 and 26. They want tradition. They want to have a sense of inheritance and a sense of place and a sense of timeless virtues that are reflective of the eternity we've all been called to. So it's pretty fascinating stuff.
Do you think that people just naturally, within themselves, it's part of human nature that they want to, even though they're being indoctrinated from very early ages in schools and in the educational system, and now with the media and social media, even though that indoctrination is constant, is there something intrinsic within human nature to revert back to those traditionalist kind of mores?
I think so. I think we have a sense of exactly what our founding fathers talked about, of nature and nature's God. We can't do physics without theory, and theory is not tangible. It's not material. There's a spiritual element to theory. Actually, the Greeks would call it theoria. And of course, that theory needs actual, tangible, material reality to reveal itself in. But you need both that heaven and earth, that transcendent and that specific. And when you have the left basically destroying all transcendence and redefining everything in terms of power relationships and grievances and resentment politics, it starts eating itself up, and you start looking for something that gives your life a lot more meaning. And that's what we seem to be seeing going on.
Very, very well. Any recommended reading from Dr. Steve Turley you'd like to tell the audience about before we go?
Oh, my, yeah. Well, if they just go to an Amazon and just punch in my name, I've got about 20 books on everything from the return of Christendom to the new nationalism to the coming rise of Christian education, the triumph of tradition. Lots of neat titles there that I think people will find it gives them an aerial view of what's going on so they can interpret the 24/7 crazy news cycle we experience each and every day, but with larger critical trends, all rooted in scholarship to help them make sense of the world and recognize, actually things are getting a lot more conservative over time. It's going to take some time, but things are moving in our direction.
You still doing Turley Talks on YouTube?
Absolutely. 2 videos a day. Yep.
That's Turley Talks. And you can check him out anytime. And thanks for spending some time with us again, Dr. Turley.
It's always a pleasure, Gary Jeff. Thank you so much for all that you do.